Program is Not a Process by Core Dumped, probably my new favorite YouTube channel because it takes me back to the days when I was just getting a computer science degree and I was actually learning about things that were interesting. Most people learn to code so they can actually build things that are genuinely useful. Not me. I just like understanding how things work, and this channel is going to let us do that.
A question that arises in computer science is what to call all the activities performed by the CPU.
I hate to pause it right now, but I think so just based on the title, the first thing that I think of is that a program versus a process, what's the difference? I guess a process is just an instance of a program. For example, like for one program, you can have multiple processes. And a program, I believe, is just going to be stored on your disk. So it's like persisted there versus a process is going to be stored in memory and it's going to be short-lived or temporary at the very least.
Early computers were batch systems that executed work units called jobs. As I discussed in my video about concurrency, when time-sharing operating systems emerged, they were designed to share the CPU among multiple users, so it was said that those systems ran user programs.
Interesting. I actually don't know very much at all about very early computers.
Eventually, the home computer market popularized the use of concurrency to allow a single user to run multiple programs at once.
That's very interesting. Actually, let me replay that. Did you say concurrency?
Eventually, the home computer market popularized the use of concurrency.
The use of concurrency. What he means by that, I think, is not like this is like the invention of a multi-threaded or like multi-core CPU. It's more that just you could have multiple processes running at the same time, and then the CPU is going to context switch between them. That's very interesting. So that was probably even with a single core CPU.
To allow a single user to run multiple programs at once. But in computer science, we don't refer to these entities as programs, but rather as processes. So today, we are going to learn the difference.
That's very interesting to me. This shows me how much I actually don't know because I thought Linux is just, I believe from its birth was using like processes. So that's interesting. It's kind of hard to believe that there was a point you literally couldn't run multiple processes at the same time. Just imagine living like that today. I don't even think it's possible.
Two concepts. Hi friends. My name is George, and this is Core Dumped. For the vast majority, the answer to this question seems obvious. Programs. After all, that's what a CPU does, right? It runs programs. But as I mentioned before, in computer science, the correct term is process.
That's technically correct. I wonder how mad people would get, though, if you just said program. It kind of reminds me of the other day how I said pointer in technically the wrong context.
Informally, a process is usually defined as a program in execution. Even though this definition is technically correct, what I find frustrating is that it is not enough to help a casual reader understand what a process is. So, let's start by establishing what a process is not. Think about this.
Interesting. I think he's right because like the devil is in the detail. To say that a process is an instance of a program isn't really getting into the hardware. And like I said, kind of at the beginning, the hardware matters, like the disk versus like the memory where each is stored and how it's run and all that.
Different programs are obviously intended for different purposes, but in many respects, they are similar when executing, as they all reduce to the fundamental actions performed by the CPU. And here's where we can start making distinctions. A program is a sequence of instructions and the data that the CPU needs to accomplish a specific task. Now, if you carefully analyze this description, you'll notice that it can also describe an executable file, and that's because that's pretty much what a program is.
Let's say like you have a C program, you compile it, it turns into like CPU instructions that the CPU is going to load into memory and execute. That makes sense. So what is this data? At the top of my head, I actually don't know because the executable file, it has data itself. What does that mean? Because I know when a process is running, it's going to have some memory allocated like the stack space, etc. But the executable file itself has data. I'm curious about that. So I wanted to at least have like a little bit of understanding of what that meant. So I just went to ChatGPT and asked it, so can you give me a simple example of a C program? After compilation, what parts of it would be the CPU instructions and which parts of it would be the data? I think that the CPU instructions are like relatively straightforward in terms of like if you had conditional statements, loops, and things like that, like the control flow. That makes sense that those would turn into CPU instructions. But I was surprised to see that. So if you have like global variables and, for example, string literals, those are actually saved in the data region after the program is compiled. And so local variables like this are going to be, as we would kind of expect, pushed onto like the stack space. And I would assume like the same thing with recursive calls, of course. But it's interesting to me that a string literal like this would be saved not as like a CPU instruction, but rather in the data region. So what does that mean? Like if I had multiple print statements, would that same string be copied multiple times? I'm assuming not, because that sort of optimization could be made. But actually, now that I think of it on second thought, if there are distinct strings and you want to update one of the strings, you don't necessarily want both strings to be updated. I think if we were to dig deeper into this, we would probably be getting really into the realm of like operating systems. So I guess I won't do that right now, but it does make sense that a lot of variables and just large amounts of data are going to be stored in the data region of an executable file separate from the code instructions. And so all of that is going to be loaded into memory when it's actually run, but there's going to be separate memory regions like the stack and probably the heap that can complement the data section.
A program is that passive entity that resides in your storage, waiting for you to click on it to tell the computer to start running it. As I've mentioned many times in the past, to run a program, it first needs to be loaded into memory, as that's where the CPU can start fetching instructions and data. When loaded into memory, the section containing the executable code is known as the text section, while data such as global variables and constant values is loaded into the data section.
Okay, I mean, he literally just answered the question. Sorry about that.
But running a program requires more than these two sections. It also needs extra space in memory to store all the data generated at runtime, like user input and temporary results or variables.
Yeah, so he said at runtime, like there's going to be separate memory. So I don't think he's probably going to have enough time to like go into the details of every little thing in this video, but I'll try to add like my commentary, which is that, so conceptually, think about it for a second. Why would we not have the memory up front for something like a recursive function or even different variables that may or may not necessarily be allocated? Why do we need like a variable amount of memory? Because you don't necessarily know. You could have a recursive function, depending on the input to the program, it might stack up 10 times before hitting the base case, or depending on a second input, it might stack up 20 times. If you pre-allocate the memory, you don't necessarily know how much memory it's going to take. Now, even the stack is technically limited in memory. That's why like stack overflow occurs. Like this region called the stack, which recursive functions use, it will hit a limit. Like there is a limit to this. I think you can sometimes update that limit. Many languages will have like a default limit size, but anyways.
We already know a lot about the stack and the heap, such as the fact that they are growing and shrinking in size all the time. The text section is the only one that never change, neither in size nor content.
Interesting. That would make sense based on like the CPU instructions. Text is not going to change. Stack is obviously growing for reasons I talked about, not just for recursive functions, but also like one function calls another, it's going to go on the stack. When that function's finished, it's going to return back to the previous function. The heap, I actually don't remember off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure one program, if it's using heap memory, the amount of memory that that program is actually using from the heap could change, but theoretically, you should be able to use as much memory as your computer has for the heap. Let me actually just double check that. Just from our cursory Google search, I guess this part is actually AI generated, but it does look like a program can use unlimited amounts of heap memory. What's the default stack memory limit in C, for example? It looks like it's 1 megabyte. I don't know if that depends on the compiler, but again, like you can see that this is like relatively small. So it's reasonable that you could hit a stack overflow, even if there's not infinite recursion. Like that's why recursion is actually not good. And you're hearing this from me, the data structures guy on YouTube, that generally speaking, you don't want to do recursion. Even for valid recursion, you could hit the memory limit. Anyways.
But we can't say the same about the data section, because even though it doesn't change in size, its content may varies depending on what the running program is doing. As you can see,
so the data region can vary in size. I mean, if this is part of the executable, I wonder if that means that at runtime that is like the amount of memory that's being used by that data region is going to change. But like all of that memory should be allocated for the program, or maybe I'm misunderstanding. Let me just replay it just in case.
Can't say the same about the data section, because even though it doesn't change in size, its content may varies depending on what the running program is doing. As you can see, even though initially we loaded the program into memory, when running, this layout can no longer be considered as a program. Of course not. It has now become a process. And please note that this is the memory layout of the process, not the process itself. The reason this definition is often
That's interesting. So that's the memory layout of the process, but not the process itself. So how do you define a process? In my head, it's an operating system level unit, right? Like the operating system is managing the process. It gives it an ID. If there are multiple threads that are a part of that process, they will possibly share memory. I guess we're getting overly technical. Let's just continue.
considered informal is that the notion of what a process is far too complex to be captured in just a few words. We're not going to go into technical details in this video, because there's a video about processes already scheduled. But for now, let me help you get an idea of what a process is. Consider that little program that comes with your operating system to open text files. Now imagine we have two files to read. If we open both files, the operating system will launch the text editor app twice. This results in two separate windows, each displaying a different text file. Both are the same program, but two completely different processes.
Right.
Each process has its own memory space.
Of course.
While the content of the text section in both processes' memory is identical, since they are the same program, the data they are working with is different.
Right. So that obviously makes sense. And it also makes sense that in a text editor, all of the data would be going to the heap. You, again, wouldn't want to run out of like stack space for that. Imagine just declaring a massive variable with megabytes, like a megabyte long string or something like that. Probably want to avoid something like that.
In this example, the first process is working with a much larger text file than the second, so it naturally requires more memory to manage its data. And if you're a casual viewer, hopefully that's everything you needed to understand the difference between a program and a process.
Are we casual viewers? I don't feel like I'm a casual viewer. I always want to know like the exact details. And by the way, definitely subscribe to this guy. If you're not convinced by now, definitely subscribe to this guy. Core Dumped. I don't want to just call him this guy. I actually know him very little. He's a very nice guy. He's actually perfectly okay with me reacting to this video. I probably should have mentioned that towards the beginning, but his channel is just fantastic. I could not get enough of it.
I want to send a special thanks to all of you, because we finally surpassed 100,000 subscribers. I enjoy learning new things as much as you do. In the same way, I encourage you to check out Brilliant.
If you're going to get Brilliant, definitely go to Core Dump's channel and use the link in his description and make sure to support him.
I emphasize that a program by itself is not a process. A program is a passive entity, whereas in contrast, a process is an active entity. Although two processes may be associated with the same program, they are nevertheless considered two separate execution sequences. I know that having a notion of what a process is not the same as being able to define it in technical terms, but as I mentioned earlier, a dedicated video on processes is coming soon. This episode is not over though. Everything I've discussed so far makes sense for compiled languages. When using languages like C or Rust, the result of the compilation is an executable file, that is, the program itself. But what about interpreted languages like Python or JavaScript, where there is no compilation process? In Python, for example, every time we want to run code, we must first instruct the computer to run the interpreter, and then
one thing I actually want to go back to is he put Java in the same realm as interpreted. And so that to me actually does make sense, given that like when you're running a piece of Java code, is it the code that's being executed? Because for people who don't know, Java turns into like bytecode, and then there's a separate program called the Java Virtual Machine, which then runs that Java code. So in a sense, I think it is interpreted. It really is, because what's running is the Java Virtual Machine, at least an instance of it. I'm actually not an expert on Java. If somebody wants to comment, maybe we can answer this ourselves. Let's use Claude this time. And so I asked when a Java process is running, does it get its own instance of the Java Virtual Machine? Yes, when a Java process is running, it typically does. So this may or may not be correct. I'm going to assume it is, because for something basic as this, I would think Claude is correct. We could also Google this. But so that's very interesting. So in that sense, yeah, I mean, Java definitely does feel like a interpreted language. I don't want to start a debate or anything. And in the same realm, I actually recently learned this, that Python is also compiled. Like there is a compilation step. Like I used to think, like I had a very naive understanding of how the Python interpreter worked. I thought it literally just read the Python text files line by line, but there is a compilation step. So what is the compilation step with Python code? And how does it differ from Java compilation? Okay, so there is a compilation step in Python. It's compiled into bytecode, but it happens at runtime, I believe. There's not an actual separate compilation step. So that honestly makes me feel like you could not know that. You could not know that there's a compilation step in Java, just like you could ignore like the just-in-time compilation with JavaScript, and you'd probably be fine. I'm assuming this is mainly done for optimization reasons. Was there a point where Python did not have a compilation step? Why does it exist? For performance? So it sounds like it always was there and mainly does exist for performance reasons.
Or JavaScript, where there is no compilation process. In Python, for example, every time we want to run code, we must first instruct the computer to run the interpreter and then tell the interpreter to execute our code.
Right, so every time we run a Python file or Python program, we're creating a process, and that process encapsulates the Python interpreter, and it's going to specifically be using the file itself as like the executable, as the instruction set. Not the instruction set, as the instructions.
In other words, there are now two passive entities involved: the Python interpreter, which is a program.
Okay, right. So there's a separate unit running for that process, not just the CPU reading like the low-level instructions. There are higher-level instructions involved.
File, which is practically a text file. I would like to highlight here the fact that the Python source file is not a program. Remember that source code is just text that computers cannot understand and therefore cannot execute.
I guess in this case, and maybe I'm getting overly technical, but even let's say you took that Python file and it turns into bytecode. The distinction between this and like that C program example we were looking at towards the beginning is I wonder if this Python, when it's compiled into the bytecode, in the bytecode, I wonder if there's a separate region for the data versus like the instructions. I mean, I wonder if that matters at all, but that's just something that came to my mind.
So in this kind of situations, the program we're actually asking the computer to run is the interpreter, not the Python code we wrote. Once this new process is created, it has its own memory region, with text and data sections.
Right. I mean, of course, every process has a text and data section, but I wonder how that relates to like the bytecode or like how like the Java virtual machine does it. This is from the operating system's perspective, but from the Python interpreter's perspective, it's going to be reading like the bytecode. Where's the bytecode? Probably within the text region. I think I'm just confusing myself. Maybe they are distinct.
As well as a stack and a heap, just like any other process. The key point here is that what's loaded into the text section is not our Python source code, but the executable code of the interpreter. Our source code is loaded by the interpreter process into one of its data sections, most likely the heap, because it serves as the data the interpreter will work.
Right, that's very interesting. So this is the program that's running. For it to know how to execute, it's going to keep fetching the data from the heap. That's very interesting because still, when a program is running, it's not just running from top to bottom. Like there's control flow. For example, like you might have some instructions, but if the if statement does not evaluate to true, that if statement is going to be skipped. That must mean when you have a Python interpreter, it's going to go through the memory. Sure, it can read through the memory, but like that itself needs to be coded to skip certain parts of the code. So it's almost like when you're creating an interpreter, in a sense, you're kind of creating like an abstraction for like a CPU.
Work with, to read and interpret. And let's wrap it up for now. Compilers and interpreters deserve their own videos. Since I'm committed to continue releasing quality content, once again, I encourage you to subscribe.
I encourage you guys to subscribe as well. Honestly, his channel is fantastic.